Hello, welcome to the Crime Gist. My name is Damisa. Today we are looking at a case that took place in Kenya in 1980. It involves a Kenyan woman and an American man whose meeting would lead to a tragedy like no other. This case caused a lot of outrage among Kenyans in that year because of the total disregard and lack of empathy that was openly shown to this Kenyan lady. As we will see in this case, even the justice system at the time was structured in such a way that seemed to oppress Kenyans. It is as if their lives mattered less than those of their oppressors. So stick around for all the gist. In the 70s and 80s, Kenya had entered a military partnership deal with the US. The treaty made the Kenyan port of Mombasa one of the liberty ports for American ships patrolling the oceans to guard Middle East oil shipping lines. The result was that ships with thousands of sailors frequently docked the port of Mombasa for a period of up to 6 weeks. The sailors were much awaited and anticipated by the business community in the city of Mombasa and by commercial sex workers too. These American Marines, sometimes numbering as many as 1,500, came loaded with cash and were generous with their money. They lived large and spent large. South Korean Navy personnel also docked frequently at the port of Mombasa back in the day, though the South Koreans were considered tight with money and not as popular as the American Marines. These sailors, after being at sea for a long time, sometimes needed to relax, enjoy drinks, and meet beautiful women to entertain them. This need for companionship on the side of the sailors and the need for money on the side of the Kenyan women created a steep demand for commercial sex. In August 1980, as usual, the vessels descended upon the port of Mombasa, bringing with them a wave of sailors who were eager to partake in the pleasures that awaited them on land. One among the sailors was a young man known as Frank Sundstrom. Frank had a thing for chocolate women. He also liked to dance, and therefore would frequent nightclubs in Mombasa with his fellow sailors. While there, he felt the need to interact with the local women. It is at a nightclub that year, 1980, that his eyes would meet those of a beautiful 32-year-old Kenyan woman, Monica Njeri. This sealing the fate that would befall the two. Monica Njeri, a sex worker and single mother of two, was striving to provide for her two daughters, Jane Wanjiko and Teresia Wangeshi, aged 8 and 13 at the time. Monica saw in the arrival of American sailors an opportunity to secure a brighter future for her and her two children. Growing up in a small village in central Kenya, Monica's childhood was a mixture of joy and hardships. Despite the challenges of poverty and limited opportunities, she was a bright and spirited lady who was described as a happy soul. But tragedy struck early in Monica's life when she fell pregnant at a tender age. The man who did this took no responsibility for it, leaving her to raise the two kids on her own. With no one to turn to for support, she was forced to fend for herself and her kids, relying on her wits and inner strength to survive in a world that seemed destined to break her spirit. It was against this backdrop of loss and adversity that Monica made the difficult decision to leave her village and seek her fortune in the bustling port city of Mombasa. With nothing but a fierce determination to carve out a better life for herself and her loved kids, she set out on a journey that would ultimately lead to her tragic fate, and more so when her path crossed with that of Frank Sundstrom. Frank Joseph Sundstrom was born in Chicago on 20th April 1961 to Anna Sundstrom and Robert Sundstrom. Robert, his father, worked as an artist and a jazz musician. He had a passion for keeping the music of the 1920s, 30s, and 40s alive. He was a member of various bands, including the original Salty Dogs. Playing mostly in the Boston area, his music also welcomed fans into the Celtics games and brought smiles to people commuting on the Boston subway system. He was married to Anna Sundstrom, and together they had 5 boys, among them Frank Joseph Sundstrom. When Frank grew up, he wanted to find his passion just like his father. At 17, upon graduating from high school, Frank enlisted in the Navy, hoping to find his own purpose and meaning in the disciplined structure of the military life. But the realities of service soon proved to be far more challenging than he had anticipated. Frank struggled to reconcile his sense of identity with the demands of his newfound role. Sometimes he felt lonely and craved for someone to fill that void. He was then stationed in Kenya in the 1970s. It was in the midst of this sea of uncertainty and loneliness that his path would cross with that of Monica Njeri. Njeri and Frank met at Florida nightclub in Mombasa on 3rd August 1980. When Monica first laid her eyes on Joseph Sundstrom, she was drawn to his enigmatic aura and good looks. As they danced the night away in the local nightclub, Monica and Frank found solace in each other's arms, their shared sense of longing binding them together in a moment of fleeting intimacy. In each other, they saw the promise of escape from the harsh realities of their respective worlds. They had a wild night drinking beer before deciding to head out to a hotel room. Her fee for the night was $23, which Sundstrom paid when they got to the room. Then they got on to the main business of the night, drank more, and then went back right to it. But then, as the night progressed, the stage was set for a night that would change their lives forever. Everything would go downhill, and only one of them would leave that room alive that night. It had begun innocently enough with whispered words of desires and stolen kisses, but as the night wore on, Frank's desires grew more twisted and his requests more sinister. Monica began to feel very uncomfortable with some of his requests and refused to proceed any further with him. Her rejection fueled a kind of rage in Frank that she had never seen before. In an unexpected twist, he violently started demanding his money back. And as Monica resisted, he seized a nearby beer bottle and brought it crashing down upon her head. The room erupted into chaos, the air filled with the sound of breaking glass and Monica's anguished screams. But Frank was not finished yet. Oh no. With a cold and calculated precision, he repeatedly stabbed her multiple times on her neck and face with the broken pieces of glass. Alarmed by Monica's dying screams, the hotel management called the police. By the time they got there, Monica had bled to death right there on the hotel bed. Frank Sundstrom was then led away in handcuffs and charged with murder. He immediately didn't deny what he had done. He confessed to it without issues. In today's world, a confession like that needs no full trial. You confess to murder, you go to jail for murder. There is nothing to debate about that. I believe that's how it's supposed to work, right? But not in those years. Not when it was a white man confessing to killing a poor Kenyan sex worker. The trial that followed was a harrowing ordeal because, as we will see, justice was a fleeting concept in the corridors of power. Despite admitting to the murder, Frank was given a deal in which he would be charged with the lesser crime of manslaughter. The judge in this case was a white man, and so were 13 other High Court judges at the time. The government prosecutor in this case was also a white man known as Nicholas Harwood. And Frank's criminal defense lawyer was a man of Asian descent known as Prem Prinja. It is said that at some point during the trial, the prosecutor, who should have been the man to help put Frank in jail, seemed to almost take the defense side. If you know your history, you understand why the Kenyan judiciary in the 70s and 80s was filled with white judges, prosecutors, and lawyers. If not, we will get to that in a minute. Either way, while other murder cases took years to conclude, Frank's case took a record of just 2 months from the moment the crime was committed to the verdict. When the verdict was finally announced, it sent shockwaves through the courtroom, leaving Monica's family in disbelief. Despite overwhelming evidence of his guilt, Frank Joseph Sundstrom was acquitted of murder. His sentence was reduced to a mere slap on the wrist by a justice system seemingly indifferent to the pain and suffering he had caused. The judge, 74-year-old Justice L.G.E. Harris, released him on a fine of just 500 Kenyan shillings and a 2-year good behavior promise. Tensions ran high in the courtroom as the full weight of Monica's murder bore down on all who bore witness to it. When Sundstrom was released from custody, his mother, Anne, stood by his side, her heart heavy with relief. As they hurriedly left the courtroom, she whispered words of gratitude to the judicial system that had set her son free. Her faith in the justice system was unshaken by the tragedy that had befallen Monica Njeri and her family. The Sundstroms almost immediately left the country without ever paying the fine. They went home smiling while Kenyans were left trying to make sense of the verdict. Monica's family was left to grapple with the bitter sting of injustice. Their faith in the legal system was shattered beyond repair. For them, the verdict was not just a miscarriage of justice, but a cruel betrayal of everything they held dear. It seemed that Frank Sundstrom had gotten off easy because he was white and male. He was also backed by a white system. The complex nature of the judiciary at the time also played a big role in this case. In the aftermath of the colonial rule, Kenya's judiciary was still in its infancy, struggling to shake off the shackles of its oppressive past. During Charles Njonjo's days as the Attorney General, there was a deliberate move to bar Africans from ascending to key positions in the judiciary. As the Attorney General, Charles Njonjo was in no particular hurry to replace the white bench with a black bench. During his time in office, which was from independence to 1980, the High Court as well as the Court of Appeal were the preserve of European judges. The legacy of British colonialism loomed large over the halls of justice, with British judges and officials wielding considerable power and influence. And in a system with corruption, the scales of justice were often tipped in favor of the privileged few. In Sundstrom's case, his status as a white American sailor undoubtedly played a role in his lenient treatment. This verdict, as expected, sparked national outrage. The outrage bore nothing though, as the Attorney General at the time, James Karugu, claimed he was legally impotent to do anything about the case. He made a comment stating that if he had any alternative, he would have appealed this case to a higher court. Unfortunately, by that time, Parliament was yet to amend Section 379 of the Criminal Procedure Code, which would have allowed the Attorney General to appeal such a case in the Court of Appeal. As for now, Frank was a free man, and the judge who gave this verdict, Judge Harris, would retire 4 months after this outrageous verdict. Frank, on the other hand, after leaving for the US, got married, started a family, and moved on with his life as if nothing had happened. He even joined the Jehovah's Witness Hall, saying that he was born again. And yet, unbeknownst to many, the saga of Frank Sundstrom was still far from reaching its conclusion. He and his wife Paula had 2 kids known as Michelle and Matthew. Both of their kids suffered from a rare disorder known as ALD, which is a disorder that disrupts the breakdown of certain fats. The 2 kids would sadly pass away at a really young age. Michelle died in the year 2000 at only 11, and Matthew died in 2009 at the age of 13. This loss was too much for Frank to bear. It made him spiral and start drinking hard. As the years passed and the wounds slowly healed, Frank Sundstrom's name would resurface once again, this time in America. On December 11, 2012, exactly 33 years after the murder of Monica Njeri, Frank Sundstrom found himself once again ensnared in a web of violence and despair. He crashed into a car and in an instant killed Tamara Norlin, 71, and her 2 passengers, Marjorie, who was 90, and Marjorie's daughter, Barbara, who was 63. Frank was charged with 3 counts of second-degree manslaughter for his role in this fatal accident that left the 3 ladies dead. As the authorities conducted the investigations, a chilling truth emerged. A blood sample taken from Frank Sundstrom just hours after the crash revealed a blood alcohol level more than twice the legal limit. The echoes of Monica Njeri's tragic death lingered in the air as Frank Joseph Sundstrom faced new sets of charges for the death of the 3 women. The victims were hoping that behind bars he would grapple with the demons that haunted him and the pain he had caused when he killed Monica and the 3 ladies. The enormity of his actions weighed heavily on his conscience as he faced the full weight of the law. At the trial, he was seen shedding tears and asking for forgiveness. Frank was offered a plea bargain and handed a 14-year sentence. The justice system deemed 14 years a fair punishment for the lives he had robbed and the pain he had inflicted. For a moment, it seemed as if the scales had tipped towards the side of fairness, but in a sad, disappointing twist, however, Frank, the man who had become a symbol of destruction and sorrow, did not serve his full sentence. He was released prematurely, a decision that sparked controversy and outrage. He was free to breathe the air of freedom and to live among the innocents he once decimated. The same man Kenya had set free 33 years ago, despite confessing to killing Monica, ended up killing 3 other women and still not serving his full sentence. 4 innocent lives snuffed out in a blink of an eye, their hopes and aspirations extinguished by the callous actions of one man. Yet nothing happens to him. So much for justice. Frank Sundstrom lived until the age of 58, his life coming to a close on September 22, 2019. In his obituary, however, there was no mention of his past crimes and the lives he had taken or the nightmares he had induced. His wife, Paula Sundstrom, would also pass away unexpectedly at the age of 58 in December 2022. As for Frank, the narrative was one of a man devoid of the blood on his hands and the guilt and remorse that should have followed him to his grave. One cannot help but wonder, had the judge who acquitted Sundstrom known the future deaths he would cause, would the verdict have been different? We can only speculate on such matters as we do not possess the power to change the past or foresee the future. But even as they mourned their loss, Monica's family refused to be silenced, their voices ringing out against the injustices that had robbed them of their loved ones. Through their tireless advocacy and relentless pursuit of truth, they sought to ensure that Monica's memory would not be forgotten. Njeri's brother, Peter Muigai, would years later sue the US government on behalf of Njeri's children. The case was settled out of court, with Njeri's family getting $16,000 in damages. And thus, Monica Njeri's murder case file was closed. For her daughters, Jane Wanjiko and Teresia Wangeshi, the loss of their mother was a wound that will never fully heal. Their grief, compounded by the knowledge that her killer had escaped justice, must be very hard to bear. They were robbed of the chance to get to know their mom since they were very young at the time of her murder. And to imagine that her killer lived a seemingly normal life before dying of natural causes. Her family was left with only a legacy of pain and unanswered questions. Did the guilt eat away at Frank's conscience, or did he sleep peacefully at night oblivious of the destruction he had caused? These are questions we all would like to know but may never know the answer to. Until then, we continue to question the scales of justice and the stories they leave in their wake. That brings us to the end of that. Let me hear your thoughts down below, and as usual, do not forget to subscribe, comment, and share this episode with other true crime junkies like yourself. See you right here on the next one.